This episode is in collaboration with Winona LaDuke's Hemp and Heritage Farm Kickstarter, which you can find at kickstarter.com.
The silence is broken by somebody crying, trying to be heard, never a word. Always the attitude, sort out your own, always alone. Wishing for something the world is denying. Out in the wilderness somebody's crying. Somebody wishing for something to happen, wishing to tell, wishing to help. Someone was listening, someone who cared, never despaired. Someone to lean on and someone to trust, who needs your assistance and finds your disgust.
Hello and welcome to For the Wild podcast. I'm Ayana Young. Today we will be speaking with Winona LaDuke. Winona LaDuke is an internationally renowned activist working on issues of sustainable development, renewable energy, and food systems. She lives and works on the White Earth Reservation in northern Minnesota and is a two-time vice presidential candidate with Ralph Nader for the Green Party. As program director of Honor the Earth, she works nationally and internationally on the issues of climate change, renewable energy, and environmental justice with indigenous communities. And in her own community, she is the founder of the White Earth Land Recovery Project, one of the largest reservation-based nonprofit organizations in the country, and a leader in the issues of culturally based sustainable development strategies, renewable energy, and food systems. In this work, she also continues national and international work to protect indigenous plants and heritage foods from patenting and genetic engineering. Thank you so much, Winona, for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So I want to just jump right into indigenous food sovereignty and discuss how the blanket term of food really dishonors the web of sentient beings whose lives are sacrificed to nourish our bodies, minds, spirits, and communities. And it's powerful to remember that it was truly not so long ago that all of humanity's nourishment still came from a dynamic and sacred relationship with our ecosystems and our plant and animal kin, instead of this monoculture fed by fossil fuels. And in the aftermath of the colonial desecration of Turtle Island's traditional foods, the bison of the Great Plains and the Dene sheep herds of the Southwest, and then even the salmon of Cascadia, we're left with a void where the sacred once was. But this sacredness lives on in the seeds being recovered and safeguarded, in the gardens being planted and tended, a realm you've worked vibrantly in for decades. So I'd love if you could speak about this revitalization of indigenous food diversity that is currently unfolding, and also tell us about the White Earth Land Recovery Project and the Turtle Island Slow Food Movement.
Yeah, well, thanks. What a great introduction to some of this work. So I want to say that, in our territory, I live on the White Earth Reservation. We call our land Anishinaabe King, or the land to which the people belong. And we still have a lot of those traditional sacred foods here. Our most sacred, I would say, is our wild rice, our Mahnomen. This is the only place in the world wild rice grows naturally. I know there's some diked rice paddies in Northern California with some of them are organic, most of them have pesticides and herbicides. And I'll tell you what, it doesn't taste like a lake. It tastes like a patty. So where I live, we have this sacred relationship that is retained each summer. The month is called Mahnomen Jesus, which is the wild rice-making moon. And we go out, we put our prayers out, and we take to our lakes and rivers and harvest our wild rice with 2 sticks in a canoe. And then we come in and we parch it over fire, and it is available, for our community. We hold it for our feasts, and we use it for all our ceremonies. And so, there are a lot of places that has been broken, but it is not broken in our territory. And I am here because of rice. It is what I've been working on for many years, including, in 2000, we began this battle the University of Minnesota wanted to genetically engineer wild rice because it created all these diked rice paddies in Minnesota. I mean, just to give you a perspective, about 90% of the rice that's for sale in markets, including your Whole Foods and your organic stores, is paddy rice. It's not wild rice, it's paddy rice. It's grown in a paddy, and I don't think you can call it wild. We call it tame rice. But the U won the right to genetically engineer the varieties and to see what it could come up with. And so the University of Minnesota, and so they had a 7-year battle on that. And in that 7-year battle, we secured state legislation which requires a full cultural and environmental impact statement prior to any introduction of any genetic modification of wild rice. And so, it has not happened. But, I say that, and that's pretty much how I came involved in the slow food movement, because slow food then recognized what we had done and gave us, in 2003, we received the International Slow Food Award for biodiversity for our campaign, our successful campaign. Well, at that point, it was ongoing. 2007 is when we won, but, to protect our wild rice from genetic engineering. And I've been working on this a long time. I've been a traditional, corn grower, beans, squash, and rice. I'm, a ricer, but I also, I don't do my work through the White Earth Land Recovery Projects anymore. I left them 7 years ago, or 6 years ago when the pipeline campaign began, the opposition to the Enbridge Alliance. But we do sell our wild rice through Honor the Earth, and it's still pipeline free after 5 years.
Wow, that's a huge work to be fighting for this wild rice on top of the pipelines and how they're all interconnected. And, I think many of the audience members may understand the consequences of the environmental consequences, should I say, of genetically modifying traditional food plants. But what are your feelings about the spiritual consequences when we take these seeds and disturb them?
Well, what I would say is that when I went and told my elders what the University of Minnesota wanted to do, they, there's not a lot of knowledge about genetic engineering because, most of my elders never heard about that before. And so I explained it to them, and their response was, well, who said they could do that? That's what they said. Did Gitche Manitou or the Creator say they could do that? So, from our perspective, the genetic engineering of food, of our plants, food, as you said, I wouldn't use that word, but our sacred seeds or our sacred plant relatives, our relatives with roots, we think that's spiritually wrong for sure.
And I'm also wondering, why is indigenous food sovereignty and the diversity of, indigenous plant systems so vital to the survival of humanity as the climate changes?
Because, if the Irish potato famine taught us anything, it should have taught us that what you want is biodiversity and not a monocrop. And so, at one point there was tremendous agrobiodiversity. There was 8,000 varieties of corn and a multitude of species of all these other amazing foods. And they were all developed by our people with the Creator. I mean, corn itself, as you know, used to be teosinte a long time ago, and teosinte doesn't look anything like corn. And so those 8,000 varieties were, really part of who we are and our culture. And so I think about our relationship to our relatives that have roots, and it's strong, and it remains strong.
And on a legal level, how is the emerging recognition of intellectual property rights being utilized to protect indigenous seed from genetic manipulation?
Oh, that's such a great question. I have to say that there's a lot of work underway. A couple years ago, I spent some time working on a food plan for the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, and including in that was the policies of essentially, what I would refer to as seed to table protection of your food from whether it is the genetic integrity of your foods, because our people have been very clear, and these are our sacred foods or these are our sacred relatives, and to the issues of, having access to land or access to food, and then issues, around serving that food, because, everyone knows that the FDA and these other agencies have been really trying to cut down or clamp down on local foods, but tribes have jurisdiction over these issues. And so, I think from my perspective, it's not just work on the intellectual property rights issues, but it's the whole question of, food's a human right. And a nation or indigenous nation, has the right to protect their food and to ensure their people are fed. And so that's kind of the broad sweeping work. that I'm interested in. And I have to say that I don't do a lot of international work. I do mostly tribal policy work because I like to work at home, or I like to work with tribes. And yeah, it's an emergent and growing, and certainly, under international agreements, increasingly there's a recognition of these issues. At the same time, there's, it's going to be a constant battle because that's the way the predator economy, or I kind of started calling it the Wendigo or the cannibal economy is. They always keep trying to take. They don't back down, and so you got to fight them back.
The Wendigo cannibal economy. I've been speaking with others lately about that, and I think even as we move greater culture back into a way that appreciates the sacredness in everything, through our localized food and energy movements and our ceremonial and prayerful gatherings, we still have one major hindrance to overcome, which is money. And it seems that as long as we still require money to survive in this society, we'll struggle with the balance between the monetary value and sacred value of our food or our art or services to one another. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on what sacred or regenerative economy means within the prevailing capitalistic and cannibalistic paradigm?
Well, I don't spend a lot of time trying to fix that one. I spend most of my time trying to move to the next economy because this one is, quite broken. The whole structure of it is predicated on taking more than you need and not leaving the rest. And, nobody who's listening to this needs a full lecture on what's wrong with the economy. We've got it. We understand that. Like, just to give you an example, from my perspective, a capitalist economy or this present economy values accumulation, collecting things, hoarding them, keeping them, counting your assets, making sure you have a really big retirement fund because you're going to be cold and alone and by yourself and sick. And so that whole preying on that whole thing is super unhealthy. Now, an indigenous economy is based far more on generosity. So, for instance, up there in the Northwest Territory, they have these potlatches. And the giveaway, or at a powwow, what you see is that the giveaway or what you gift away, your generosity, is valued far more than your stinginess or your accumulation. So it's like a totally counter economy. So, and that's the only way we're going to survive, is if we return to something which values more. At the same time, that does not mean that you can't have a trade economy, and it doesn't mean that you can't have an integrated economy. And in this era we are in now, we're going to need to figure those pieces out. So, for instance, the Anishinaabe people, my reservation and territory, we probably have, 1 million pounds. We have more than that of wild rice that we could sell. 1 million pounds. That's more than we eat. It's always been something that we've traded. I travel with it. I sell it all the time, but I also trade with tribes everywhere, Native people everywhere for whether it is my salt or sometimes my pinon nuts. I trade for many, many different great gifts that are elsewhere. I'm a big fan of the chilies. I do grow heritage corn varieties, but sometimes I trade for other people's corn for my sacred wild rice. So we trade what we are not going to eat, and we keep the wealth in our economy. And it's, to me, it's like the difference between, of course, fair trade or free trade. I mean, I'm interested in fair trade, fair and just relationships. And so that's, the work that I see. And, the future is really going to be that. But at the same time, I'm an economist by training. They always call me an environmentalist, but I'm actually technically an economist. And I think most people, I don't know, I went to Harvard and MIT and was trained, and I'm a rural development economist. So, my interest is really in how you get control of your economy. Like on my reservation and like in a lot of other territories, we spend a quarter of our money on energy and a quarter on food. I think we're spending about a quarter on healthcare right now, and most of that's hemorrhaging out. What I mean by that is buying food from someplace else, and you're buying energy from someplace else, and your healthcare system is super decrepit and super full of opioids. So I'm interested in how you relocalize that economy and stop it from hemorrhaging. And then, you'll have a stronger economy, and your need for cash will be diminished significantly. So that's kind of my plan for my territory, and that's actually what I'm trying to do in my own extended community at this point, because I think that if you're going to, hitch your cart to the fossil fuels economy or hitch your cart to some vagaries of some capitalist economy and some development plans or some latest scheme, you're always going to end up, losing out and be super unstable. And, we already have enough stress in our community. I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but, I'm really interested in the next economy.
Yeah, it does answer it. And I think it brings up a really good point that when we're trying to use all of our energy to fight against this just insanity, this global madness, which is capitalism, it takes a lot of energy and not a lot of wins. And so I think focusing on the regenerative economy or what we can move into is actually a lot more life-giving for many people. Not to say that the folks that are fighting against it shouldn't be doing that. I praise them as well. And, what I've heard you bring up a few times is wanting to localize, wanting to work on policy that is in Turtle Island rather than going to the international circuit. And I really appreciate that and resonate with that in my own life. I'm not even really interested in international travel anymore because I realize that I want to be where I love, where I know, where is family, where I know I can have a positive influence. And I look back at your career as I've been studying for this interview, and you work to protect Indigenous rights within a myriad of different veins of action, from the ground action in communities in many corners of Turtle Island to then running for vice president alongside Ralph Nader. I'm wondering, why do you now focus on the grassroots localized action instead of mainstream politics, and why has your attention moved there for you personally?
Well, you're right. It depends on where you are when you start in your life. My first work was international work. And that, I was a student at Harvard, and the, American Indian movement began international work through the International Indian Treaty Council. And I worked for the American Indian movement. And the first UN conference, the first United Nations conference on the rights of indigenous people, was held in 1977 at the United Nations. And I was able to participate in that. I was involved in that. I was, a very young woman. I was 18. And I was inspired. My peers or people I looked across, the world to were those in the African National Congress, the ANC, fighting for the liberation of Black people in South Africa, or the Polisario, SWAPO, and the Zapatistas. So I have traveled. I've been in a lot of those places. And I am in solidarity with those because our struggles are international struggles. At the same time, I was raised in a rural area. I'm not a very good urban person. People think I'm super sophisticated. I don't know what they think, but I'm not. I get stressed out in a city, and I prefer to be in a rural community. So, I returned to my reservation when I got out of Harvard in 1981, and I've lived there since. In my, my work there, you're right. I've done about everything. I've been to the UN. I've run for national office. I've been arrested. I've testified at Congress. I've testified at the state. And, I work in the arena that you need to work in at the time. But the skills and things that occur move and change. So, for instance, in international work, that was when we first started working on the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, was in 1977. It took 30 years. It took 30 years to get the UN to pass by the General Assembly the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Now, that was some tremendous work, some tremendous persistence by, many Indigenous people who went to the UN repeatedly and said we should have rights that are like the rights of others. And I commend them. And that work continues internationally. And, the idea that someone is looking at you, number 45 doesn't really care if anybody is looking at him, but other countries do. So, to keep the attention on egregious human rights violations by Canada, for instance, that work needs to continue at the United Nations. For me, I'm actually not that patient. I'm not that patient in that, let's just be honest, it took 30 years to pass that UN declaration. I wasn't going to go to the UN for 30 years and spend, thousands of dollars getting myself over there to go through that process. I'm really kind of more of an action person. And so, I returned to my reservation and wanted to work on the issue of land justice, because if you don't have access to your land, you're not going to have access to your economy. And so in that, I worked to form the White Earth Land Recovery Project because 90% of our land was held by non-Indians. We bought back 1,400 acres of land, And it's a land trust. And on that, we grow a lot of traditional foods. And on that, we have a, maple syruping operation, and we own a radio station, and, we have a USDA certified food processing facility, wind turbines, a lot of really great stuff. And I was really proud to be part of that. And so, I like tangible things. I feel like that while you fight the bad guys, you got to fight the bad guys, girl. Because if you don't fight the bad guys, they will run over you. So, I continued work, obviously, on opposition to mega projects, stupid infrastructure projects like the Line 3 pipeline that we are facing now. But at the same time, I want to make where we're going. And I don't even call it the alternative. I call it the enlightened path. I mean, in our prophecies, it's referred to as the time of the seventh fire. And we're told we got a choice between two paths. One is well-worn, but it is scorched. The other is not well-worn, but it is green. And so I work on moving us to the green path. And that's my interest in this work. In the meantime, you got to make sure that they don't destroy you. And so I still remain very involved. Unfortunately, I would say, but very involved in the work to oppose Line 3, which is pretty much the last tar sands pipeline proposal that you're ever going to have. And that's a proposal for 915,000 barrels a day that they want to bring through northern Minnesota, and it's the Enbridge Corporation. And, I don't know if you know much about our history, but last year we defeated a similar pipeline in the same territory, and that was called the Sandpiper. So this is round 2 with Enbridge. When Enbridge didn't get the Sandpiper, they bought 28% of the Dakota Access Pipeline and put a lot of money into making sure that that happened. And that's how, we became related to the Dakota Access battle, but we defeated them in Minnesota, and now they are back. And I tell you what, like every time I go to one of those hearings, there's some guy standing up saying, you can't live without oil. You can't live without oil. And I keep saying, yes, you can. You can move on, and it's time to move on. And, we need efficiency. We need local food, so we're not shipping stuff around the world, from everywhere else, 1,400 miles from farmer to table. And we need, local food economies, local energy economies, efficiency. And, as you know, we also need hemp.
Take me back home to the air that's warm and the silent soaking rain, where the cedar grows to the one who knows nothing is ever in vain. There was someone there who would take good care that nothing was ever the same.
Just to touch on the pipeline again, you were able to fight the Sandpiper and they weren't able to go through with that, but now they're back. And I'm wondering, what were the tactics that worked for the Sandpiper? And do you think those tactics will work again, or is there a new strategy in place?
Well, the basic strategy that we have is to keep pushing back. The fact is that this pipeline battle is for a tar sands pipeline. Tar sands production is not increasing, nor should it, as the divest movement, pushes against all of their strategies. Let's just be clear on this. The Enbridge Corporation has 6 pipelines in northern Minnesota right now. Those pipelines were put in, most of them, before the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act or any environmental laws. And so we have an aging pipeline infrastructure in northern Minnesota, which is not surprising because the United States has a D in infrastructure. Every place it is failing. But ours is old in this territory, and it ran through 3 reservations the last time. That would be Red Lake, Leech Lake, and Fond du Lac Reservation. And it's all heads towards Superior, which just in your strategic picture, Superior is on Lake Superior, a fifth of the world's water, and is the furthest inland port, which has like a whole set of implications for it. Then it links up to these other pipelines, including the one that gave us the Kalamazoo spill, and the one that's under the Straits of Mackinac. I don't know if you've been watching that at all, but there's a pipeline under the Straits of Mackinac, which is super old and has been there. Line 5 has been there since the 1960s and is no longer anchored. So we're fighting to keep more oil from coming our way. Our plan is to keep pushing back on them and to say, first of all, Enbridge should clean up their old mess before they get a new mess. They're trying to abandon one of those lines, Line 3, and build a brand new Line 3 in a brand new corridor, which is the corridor that they wanted for the Sandpiper. So we're saying, you don't get to do that. You should clean up your old mess. That's what we're saying. And there's a lot of non-Indian landowners that are concerned about the same thing. The second thing is that in Minnesota, we're not a state which actually has any oil. So this pipeline just passes through. It doesn't even come anywhere here. And so, it's a huge risk issue for the state of Minnesota. And it's not like we're in a petro state like North Dakota. This is not North Dakota. In fact, non-Indian people work with Indian people on opposing a pipeline here. I mean, the interveners include 5 tribes. So work in the regulatory process, 5, Ojibwe tribes onto the earth, and a number of grassroots landowner associations, some landowners, and the youth climate interveners who are stellar in this battle and asking the serious questions like, what kind of planet are you going to leave me? So we're in a rigorous regulatory battle. We're in a battle over the future of Minnesota because, the question I really have to ask is, why do you want to spend $7 billion on a fossil fuel pipeline when you have over $7 billion worth of infrastructure needs just in the state of Minnesota? So why don't we put pipeline workers to work, first of all, in building infrastructure for people, not for oil companies? And then let's be sure that we can also at the same time look at the question of abandonment, because the Enbridge company says it'll cost about $1.9 billion to clean up the old mess and to remove the pipe. And so I feel like, $1.9 billion, let's just do that. Why don't you just do that and employ a lot of people? Because that's all labor. That's not even any hardware. In the meantime, there's 323 miles of pipe sitting in northern Minnesota for a pipeline that's never going to be built, the Sandpiper. And so I keep saying to Enbridge and the state of Minnesota that they should ship those pipes to Flint, Michigan, a place that hasn't had a functioning water system for about 1,200 days. So I'm like, why don't we just do the right thing, build infrastructure for people, not for oil companies? And that's a lot of our strategy is really questioning the economics, the implications for infrastructure, the need, and the environmental aspects are certainly, quite clear with climate change. But, it's an integrated approach. And then I think, as you know, there's also frontline camps. We have told Minnesota that they should not issue that permit because there are already hundreds of people camping on the proposed route in Minnesota. And if they issue that permit, there will be thousands of people. And I don't think that Minnesota is North Dakota. They do not want essentially a civil war, which is what they're going to get if they actually issue that permit.
Wow. You just gave me chills with that last statement. I feel the confidence. I really think that, as depressing as it is, that talking about environmental or human suffering isn't enough all the time, but being able to discuss the economics and the infrastructure and being able to discuss these projects on all of those levels, I think really makes a difference. And we need to be talking about it and bringing our plans to the table in ways that are multidimensional so that we can look at it and really allow more people to hear the other side of the story. I really want to talk about hemp, but there's one thing I wanted to clarify. You had talked about your traditional lands and that you had to buy 1,200 acres back. I'd love to hear from you, and I'm sure the audience would too. How did this come to be? Is it that a treaty was not honored, or was it that the land had been sold off?
Yeah, no, the treaty was not honored. This is land within the borders of the 1867 treaty or the White Earth Reservation. And you have to remember that Frederick Weyerhaeuser was our neighbor. And so the Weyerhaeuser lumber empire began in Minnesota through the pillaging of all of the wood of the territories of the Ojibwe. That's how Weyerhaeuser began. And then they built that train with J.J. Hill and all of the big lumber barons, followed by the big railroad barons. They all came from Minnesota. And so that's how the railroads were built, is off of our trees and, with everything from us. So, the land was taken through allotments, it was taken through as thumbprinted deeds, it was taken, by the Indian agent. Our land was taken. And I spent a lot of years working to get back land. And we got 10,000 acres returned, and then we started buying some land. And, there's much more to work on there, but if without land, you cannot build an economy. And so, that's kind of how I started. And then, as I said, I left the White Earth Land Recovery Project 6 years ago to begin the pipeline battle, because you can't run two major campaigns at once. And so I focused on pipelines, which, I don't really like doing, but I have some traction in this. I've done this stuff before, and so I spent 6 years of my life now fighting pipelines. That's a little bit about where that came from.
Do you feel that this purchasing of land and then putting it into a land trust is the best way for all tribes, or do you think it's really case specific when it's coming to different areas and different tribes trying to get their land back?
I think it's case specific. I mean, the model that we developed was after I looked at the Trust for Public Lands and the Nature Conservancy. And I said, we're like the Nature Conservancy, except for we're culturally based. We want to do this. So I'm going to leverage money, and people are going to donate land. And that's how we started. And, basically I'm still doing that in some ways. I mean, I've moved on from White Earth Land Recovery Project, and now, both Honor the Earth and then my new initiative in Hemp is moving into the same arena, but kind of an expanded vision.
Well, speaking of this expanded vision, I'd love to turn the conversation towards the diverse food and fiber systems that you're nurturing, from the preservation of the wild rice beds to now growing hemp at the Hemp and Heritage Farm. And, you and your community are living and breathing the actualization of a transition away from reliance on fossil fuels. So I would just love for you to take us into what you envision for the future of your farm, how we can support you, through the Kickstarter campaign, but also beyond that.
If you sit there and you look at where we need to go, you need to build an integrated post-petroleum economy. And everybody knows the story about hemp used to be everything until like the 1920s. About 80% of our clothing was hemp. And then the cotton lobby and the petrochemical lobby and the timber lobby shoved hemp to the sideline and linked hemp to marijuana, which became this evil thing and was demonized. And in a more enlightened society now, we know that there are separate things and that it's the same plant, but that hemp has a whole set of uses, and the plant itself is like so interesting to me. So just a little background, I'm a farmer. I'm a horse farmer, actually. I farm with horses. And I grow corn varieties, and I grow really cool squash. I grow tobacco, and now I'm moving into beans because I really like beans. And that's what I grow, and I grow for my family, but I have grown for some markets, and I'd like to kind of build like a Ojibwe farming association that grows for local markets and grows for, retail sales as well as for our families. So that's my interest. And, I've done it for 25 years and, I'm going to keep doing it. So in the last few years, as this battle emerged, the state of Minnesota issued industrial hemp permits. And so for the last 2 years, I've had the permit to cultivate industrial hemp in Minnesota. And so for the past 2 years, I've been growing hemp in Minnesota. And there's 26 growers in total, and maybe next year there'll be more. There probably will. My tribe actually grew 8 varieties. I only grew 1 variety. Actually, I grew 2 varieties. And the tribe grew 8 varieties for fiber, because it turns out that Minnesota used to have 11 hemp mills in it. And we used to grow for fiber, and we used to grow for rope. And so I'm kind of like, let's just try that again, because we de-industrialized this country in a really inappropriate manner. We shipped every kind of light manufacturing to China. So if you want to buy hemp fabric, you're buying from China. Pretty much that's it. And so I look around there and I say, like, what was that plan? What was that plan, to do that? And in the meantime, we turned into an economy that basically shops. 70% of our economy is based on shopping. And you have all these, union workers that no longer have jobs. And so I am, in favor of appropriate manufacturing. So I'm interested in the rebuilding. I'm working, at this basic level on the hemp because, I have an integrated farming operation that's post-petroleum, largely horses. And in that, a part of it is hemp. I don't want you to think that I'm just a hemp grower. I'm an integrated farmer, of which part of what I'm doing is hemp. So I started this Kickstarter with no idea how to do it. I got a bunch of coaching from my niece, Nydia Garcia, and Nydia taught me how to do Kickstarter. And so I'm now trying to raise $100,000 by Thanksgiving, drop dead Thanksgiving. I want to buy this farm, and on this farm we're going to grow all the cool stuff, and I'm going to have a space for my horses, my hemp, my bees, I want to do like CBD honey, and I want to develop these varietals so that we can work to get some kind of hemp fiber back in this country. And I feel like I'm your girl. I've spent my whole life fighting bad guys, and I know how to get stuff done. And I feel like this is a shot. So I'm asking people to support me in it, and I just really appreciate their support on my hemp Kickstarter. And it's not just for hemp, it's for horses, and it's my horse farming operations and all of my agriculture. So hemp is an important part of it because hemp is part of the next economy.
Yeah, there's, two things I want to hear from you. One, hemp is part of the new economy. We've talked a lot about regenerative economy, local economy. So where does hemp fit in? What kind of role does hemp play?
Like I said, right now most of the clothing we're wearing is pretty destructive. The cotton produces a lot of water and a lot of the pesticides. I think about a quarter of the pesticides used in the water are in cotton. Everything else that's like, polyester is all fossil fuels. And all that stuff makes like little microfibers that end up in our water system. I feel like that opportunity for, changing the clothing economy is in hemp. The paper economy is in hemp. The opportunity for hempcrete as a part of building is in hemp. So that's what I want to do. And, in order to do it, you just got to do it. And I've been out there a lot. I know a lot of cool people. And I feel like my community is ready to do this. And I can help provide some guidance and support for it through creating this research and development and production area for hemp. And then, if I'm able to raise $100,000, which I'm really hoping, if I get anything else, I'm going to work on trying to get a decortication machine, which is what splits up the hemp fibers to make them so that you can weave them. It's going to be a lot of work to rebuild a local hemp economy or a regional hemp economy or, in fact, a national one because we don't have any hemp mills or, anywhere in this country. But, I think it's happening, and I'm just one of the many people on it. But, I want to do this. So I'm asking for people's support.
Well, it's wonderful. I'm so excited hearing you talk about it because I can see
this.
Yeah.
No, I'm so excited myself, you can imagine.
Yeah. Well, it's really a long vision, and it's an expansive vision that encompasses so much. And, you were talking about how you want to plant a number of varietals, and I'm wondering, are they the same varieties of hemp used for fuel, fiber, and food, or?
No, they're different. There's some hemp varieties that are high in CBDs and are good for fiber, and that's kind of like an ideal situation for me. But from what I can figure, plants are kind of magical, and hemp or cannabis is certainly a magical plant. And in being magical, you can't expect a monocrop. You got to take care of plants differently. So if you're raising something for medicine or CBDs, you got to sing to your plants. You got to pray with your plants. You do that with all of them, but I don't want to be a mass producer. I want to be someone who makes good medicines. If I'm doing CBDs for my people with rheumatoid arthritis, I want to do that. And then I want to do fiber because, I want to be the person who actually is able to help work to change our economy from a fabric economy. I'm not, looking at fuel. That's probably somebody else. But there's a lot of different varieties out there, and I'm going to kind of stick to the things that resonate the most with me because that's what we do our best at, right?
Mm-hmm. So I feel extremely confident that this Kickstarter will continue to grow. And just for the audience, I'll mention this at the end, but for those of you who have a pen and paper, you go to Kickstarter.com and search Winona's Hemp and Heritage Farm, and you'll find a video and information. And I feel very confident that this is on its way to $100,000 really soon and probably beyond. And for all of us who are listening out there who are feeling inspired to support this project, is there a start date? What do you see coming up in the next few months once you reach your goal?
Well, we'll be planting in the spring, and I'm going to sort all the pieces out with the farm and get all the pieces together. And then I'm setting up some workshops on horse farming and train some more people in that. And then I'm going to be picking my seeds, hosting a big hemp conference in March up on my reservation. And then by this spring, we'll be planting. And we're going to still keep fighting that pipeline, but we're going to plant our hemp crop.
Well, one of my biggest takeaways from this conversation is something you said really recently of just doing it. You see this as a good idea and you're making it happen. And I think for all of us who are feeling overwhelmed or debilitated by the powers that be and the Anthropocene extinction and, the global capitalist and et cetera, to hear from you and to hear your conviction of just doing it, figuring it out, putting your hands in the earth and making it happen is so revitalizing to the spirit, to know that we have power and we can start something if we have the passion and the community to move forward, and how important it is to actually take those tangible steps and this kind of direct action, tangible work where you don't have to wait for the UN for 30 years to put a declaration in place, which then again, like, what does that actually even mean? You know, we're looking at the COP23 in Bonn, Germany that's happening right now, and we're putting so much energy and travel time and airplanes and people energy into creating this agreement, or trying to uphold this agreement that was made in Paris. And what is that really going to do? I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I have dear friends that are over there right now working, and I so appreciate them. But I think there's something so intrinsically powerful about taking change into our own hands and figuring out how to do it within our communities. So I just want to say thank you for sharing with us your story and your passion and how you made this happen, and how I believe it will just continue to ripple out and inspire more people to do the same.
Yeah, everybody has their part, and I'm just doing my best. And just, kind of in closing, what I'd say is that they may have taken the political system, but they didn't take the economic system. So it's our turn. Time to just do it and take care of it at a local level, reaffirm people, reaffirm our communities, and just remember that it's our future. So, we need to be about that process. So, listen, I want to thank you so much for calling me. And, if you look at our website, it's Winona's Hemp, and more information about Honor the Earth, which I direct. And if you want some pipeline-free wild rice, you can get that from Honor the Earth for your holiday season. But let's work together. And you can support my hemp Kickstarter. I really, really appreciate it. I know that not a lot of people have a lot of money, but I really appreciate being the person who has 550 backers. Makes me feel great.
Well, you definitely have backers with us at For the Wild. We support this project, and I know that all the listeners will too, because, Winona, you have spent your life busting your butt to help all of us, and you're somebody who has so much integrity and steadfastness. And I think that if people want to support a project, there's so much trust in you and what you do and what you've brought to the table in your life. So I thank you so much for being on the show today, and the best of luck with the hemp. And I'm so excited for spring when the seeds are going to be going in the ground, and they'll probably just be singing back at you saying, thank you, we love you, and we'll grow to the sky.
That's what I'm hoping. I feel really good about it too. Growing makes me happy. Hey, Miigwech, thanks for your time, okay?
Western cedar, drifting on the wind, through the mountains like a river.
Thank you for listening to For the Wild podcast. I'm Ayana Young. The music you heard today was Take Me Back Home by Heron. Then Anageha, a woman's honoring song by Joan Henry. Our theme music is Silence Returns by Bo and Like a River from Kate Wolf. I'd like to thank our amazing team at For the Wild, our producers, March Young and Reach Out, our research director, Madison Migulski, and media director, Molly Lebov. Please head over to forthewild.world to sign up for our newsletter and to learn more about our 1 Million Redwoods project. And if you value this content, please go to iTunes and rate us. Your review will help us reach wider audiences.